Hi, welcome to Susan Stanley's Stitch in Time. I'm Susan and I'm so pleased to have you joining me today. I've had a lot of new subscribers and a lot of new commenters, and I can't thank you enough for the support and just the feedback. I love the interaction, and that's what it's all about. So if you're new to my channel, welcome. If you've been here and continue to come back, thank you and welcome. This is almost like sitting in my stitching area together with you, sharing what we love. And on this channel, I typically talk about cross stitch, quilting, textiles, sewing notions, and their methods from the past. And I also like to share the progress on my projects. So I have some exciting things to share with you, and I had a recent adventure, and I have some haul from that adventure that I'm going to share. I have a quilt that I want to talk about. I have a new project that I am gathering materials for, that I'm getting ready to take some first stitches in, and some books and some announcements. So first of all, I want to tell you about my adventure to the attic. And you've probably heard a lot of other floss tubers talk about it already, but it was delightful. It's always delightful to be with other stitchers, and there is never any disappointment when you're at the attic. Jean is the hostess extraordinaire, and she makes you feel so welcomed, and it's just such a warm, friendly environment. I recommend that you make any detour in your travel plans to get there if you have the opportunity. So people brought show and tell, and we just did a lot of stitching and shared what we were working on, and it was just relaxed and lovely. And I know I have viewers who don't have the opportunity to get out and do that. So I mean, that's why we love Floss Tube so much, because we can share that time together. But getting to see projects in person and feeling the weight of the stitches in your hands on some of the linen, if it's finished or in progress, there's just something really magical about that. And I think we're very tactile people, those of us who work with textiles. So it's just kind of a tactile experience. But Grace, Paisley Stitcher, Grace, and she has a floss tube, and she'll probably show these projects, so you should hop on over and watch. She brought some of her finished samplers and passed them around, let us hold them, and there is something amazing about the dimensional aspect of the threads on the linen and just the weight of that in your hands. It's like jewels. I don't know. I just love it. She had some gorgeous whips and some beautiful finishes. Lisa kindredstitcher also shared some of her finishes. Megan, the wide-eyed stitching child, who also has a floss tube, shared some of her whips. It was just a wonderful time. And Katie, at great effort, I don't know how she thought this through and was able to pull this off, but she actually brought her casket. And first of all, I can't imagine bringing it out of the house, but packaging it, taking it on an airplane, getting it there, it was no small feat. And I have to say, I've seen it on her floss tube, I've seen it on Instagram, and that's katiestrachanembroidery if you haven't seen her channel yet. It's beautiful, but to see it in person, just like holding a sampler and seeing those threads pop off the linen, to see these three-dimensional surface embroidered pieces really almost jumping out at you or coming off the side of the box. It was just amazing. The dimensional aspect to that stitching really took me back. And then of course the threads that I use silks, but I don't use a lot of the glittery or the the more sparkly threads I haven't really used, and to see those actually used in stitching and what that does and gives the sparkle that it gives to a project was really, really fun. So it was just a lovely time to spend time at the attic. It's always a great day to spend a day at the attic. And I did make a few purchases. I bought, you can't walk into the attic without at least being a tiny bit challenged to do something on a higher count. And last time I was there, I bought some 56 count, and I've slowly picked away at it. It's not fast for me, but I wanted to try it, and it's kind of in honor of Jean for sure. And who knows, maybe I'll get better at it and it'll just sing to me. It does give you the most adorable finishes ever because it shrinks everything down. Well, this time I thought, I want to try an uneven weave. I want to try a 5360 count and see what that does because it will change the shape of the finished project. So Carolyn, who works at the attic, Stash sister, who also has a floss tube, she was working on this beautiful stitch. And I thought, I love that. I would love to see what that looks like on an uneven weave and how it changes the shape. I also wanted to move some of the motifs around and personalize it a little bit. And so my big challenge for this experience at the attic was to try waffle cone, which is 5360 legacy linen. And I'm going to try these two shades. I wanted to try two shades. And I had picked this red, and then Katie was sitting next to me and had this in her case. And she said, look at this. And I said, yes, that's it. So I'm going to stitch that with these two threads on 5360 legacy waffle cone. And one thing Jean does when you purchase the uneven weave is she puts a needle in the selvage end of the linen, so I believe that's the 53, and then the 60 is the vertical direction. I'll have to check that, and if it's different, I will definitely link that below. So I'm curious. This is going to change the shape, and of course it's going to be a challenge to stitch on a high count, which it's always a challenge for me. But anyway, I think it's going to be fun, and I'm really looking forward to trying that. And I'll be adding some things to it, so stay tuned. I'll share my progress when I dive in. Another thing I purchased that I had actually ordered ahead of time was this gorgeous Quaker chart. It's not the time period that I'm focusing on this year, and I didn't mention it in the beginning of the video, but this year I'm kind of looking at 1840 time period in the things that I do. Just really diving into the samplers and the quilts, the dyes that were available, the textiles that were available, and a lot of what was going on culturally in 1840 as well. So I loved this. I loved the colors, and it's just going to go into my collection for a future start. But here are the silks that I got, and I don't have linen yet, but make sure you can see that okay. That blue, I mean, there's something about that blue, and I would call that, if it was a textile, I would call it a Prussian blue, and it just pops. So that's something that I brought home with me. And then I walked around and around and around, and I thought, I don't know if I want to buy this chart because it's got a lot of over one, and then I thought, you know what, there's so many people talking about adapting samplers and doing parts that they like, and there's a part to this sampler that has just called me. And so it's this, of course, this is Hannah Campbell, 1838. She's my time period, and she's just so unique. And this area right here, I just thought, I could do that that's the over one area. I could do that and not do it over one. I could do it over two and just do that and make it into a pin pillow. So I bought the floss, the silks, and I'm excited. I don't have the linen yet, but I've got plenty of things for Sampler September to get me busy, to keep me busy. This one I had ordered ahead, and I think after people saw it, I just loved this chart when it came out. I think the house on it is so interesting, but what really drew me in, of course, it is 1835, which is sort of, you know, maybe a little earlier than, but you know, it's close enough. And I haven't read all the information about it. It is Oh Sweet Humility by Cross Stitch Antiques. It's the animals, the animal parade in the grass. I mean, there is such a variety of animals I have not seen in a sampler. I just loved it. I love this. I love the colors as well. There's just a sweetness to it. Oh, so that's definitely something on my list of starts. And then Amy from Mrs. Flossie, she has a floss tube channel, she's worked at the attic and now she's reproducing samplers. And she was there, so of course I had to buy her charts, her new charts. This is so sweet. It comes in two options for threads. For floss, you can do a brighter option, which is charted from the back, and a more pastel option from the front. Oh, so sweet. And then this one, I said, well, yes, I must, because my grandmother's initials are also AM. So that I had to have that come home with me. So all in all, it was a good visit to the attic. There was no disappointment there at all. Like I said, Jean is just such a gracious hostess, and you really need to go just to experience what a quality shop is like. So after the attic, I drove out to visit my mom in San Diego. My sister and her family live there as well. My sister, I think I've mentioned before, is an antique dealer, and we of course went antiquing and poking around, and it was at estate sales, and it was just so fun. And I came home with the treasure, and I also had to leave a treasure behind. So let me show you what I came home with. Now, you know, I've been looking at early work baskets, so my eyes were peeled. I wanted to find an early work basket. I don't know if they even are really readily available, if they're all in museums. I don't know. I didn't find a basket, but I did find a sewing work box. Now it needs a little bit of help. And this one, I believe from talking to some people who know about these, is probably from the late 1800s. And it would have been a locked box, yes, because everything in here was precious. And it contains little compartments. Let's see if I can show this to you. And inside the compartments, you would put your threads, your thimble. There's a pin cushion here. And there's one compartment missing, but if you can believe it, the teeny tiny handle, the teeny tiny handle that's on top of there was floating around in the bottom of one of these compartments. I mean, I just almost can't believe it. I don't think that's going to focus. Anyway, I thought, you know what, this needs to come home with me. I need to give it some love. I need to bring it back to life. And I have a box or a toolbox for stitching from the early 1800s. Now I'm going to put in a video, a short video of the table that got away because I couldn't bring it back with me on the plane, and the shipping was astronomical. So I begged my sister to just keep it at her house as long as she was willing to, and maybe someday I can drive down there and get it. I don't know, it's just so beautiful. So this one had a note inside of it, this sewing table. And you know, you can't always guarantee that that note is the accurate provenance, but it gives you a little bit of information about at least the seller or the person that the seller bought it from, what they believe the history of this item is. And so this beautiful sewing table, I can just see it in a parlor next to a chair where somebody would sit down at every opportunity to catch up on their work. It was just beautiful and delicate and had all the containers within it that little box had. So let me put this video in so you can see what I had to leave behind. So I found this piece. My sister actually found this piece, and I wanted to bring it home so badly, but there's no way. I'm flying and I couldn't. But it's a little sewing table, and if you come, you pull out the drawer, and it's got these 4 sections here, probably for threads, scissors. It's got these indentations, maybe for needle cards. I don't really know, but the feature that is so darling is this little pin cushion that you lift out, and it just sits there. And you would just probably have this next to your sewing chair, and all your supplies would be available. And it says it was used by my grandmother, Madalena Pesanche, who died in 1848. So it's pretty early. And the wood is gorgeous. It's just beautiful, and it's really sturdy. We couldn't take the legs off. We thought maybe, oh, I can get it home that way, but no. Anyway, can't you just see it? And I think from touching this, it's got sawdust or bran in there. Darling. So I love knowing how people did things in the past. I love finding the artifacts of what they did. That's why I love antiquing and going to estate sales and diving into all of it. It's just, I don't know, it's just fascinating to me. So let me tell you about this quilt behind me. This quilt I'm calling it William Morris meets the 18th century. It's a basket quilt for May. And baskets, I love baskets, and we talked about work baskets in my last video, number 33. And the meaning of baskets, I actually had to look that up in this book, because baskets seem to appear in quilts and samplers and art. There's something about the gathering of things and the significance that brings. And so baskets with flowers represent hope and friendship and love. And baskets of fruit also represent love and prosperity, kind of like a cornucopia, health and happiness. And I think, how many cross-stitch samplers have I seen? How many of you stitched that have a bowl of fruit or a gathering basket or something to do with the basket? I mean, they just seem to stretch across the time, all of the time period that they've been stitched. And baskets in quilts are the same thing. There are so many renderings of baskets in patchwork and in applique. I could do a whole FlossTube video just sharing all the basket quilts I've made, all the basket quilts I've seen, and all the cross-stitch samplers that have baskets. So as I was saying, this was part of a block of the month, and the original quilt was laid out quite differently than this one, and I'm going to put a picture in of the original quilt. The original quilt was actually from the 18th century. There have been several patterns reproduced since I made this, and there are many variations on how to put this together. But I decided to put mine together in a medallion style or a frame style. And what that means is you start with a center and you build a medallion around, and a frame, a next frame around, and the next frame around and around. I'm going to put a picture in of this quilt because it's so big I couldn't get it on the screen. I'll put a picture of it in right now so you can see it and some of the blocks close up. So at the time that I was making this, William Morris fabric had been reproduced by Barbara Brackman. I wanted to try appliquing on a dark fabric, and I was just exploring breaking away from solids or small prints and using more patterned fabrics for applique. And now I'm full on love using patterned fabrics for applique. But at that time, I was kind of half in, half out, you know, getting my toes wet. So this is kind of my introduction to that. And this is actually my husband's very most favorite quilt. I think he likes the bright colors, and he probably likes the black. It sets them off. You know, if I was going to do this again today, I would probably take a completely different slant on it. But William Morris met the 18th century. Now, William Morris was part of the 19th century, so my concept of trying to reinterpret things and keep them time period sort of within the same time period was blown out of the water on this one. But I had so much fun, and it doesn't matter. It's your, you know, when you make something, it's yours. Just like when we've talked about samplers, you know, it's your interpretation of that sampler. We can't really make things. I couldn't make this quilt exactly like the original. I couldn't reproduce it because the fabrics aren't available. Same with samplers. You know, the colors might be a little different. The linen is different. We don't really know if it was charted from the back or the front unless it's specified. We don't even get to see the back and the front typically on a chart. So there's just a lot of factors that lead us to trusting the person who charted it, but also just making it our own. And so that's definitely what I did with this quilt. I made it my own, played, and I'm pleased with the results. It's hand quilted. The back is the strawberry leaf fabric. I'll pop in a close-up of that. And William Morris was part of the arts and crafts movement, and you know, I won't go into a ton of detail about that, but he was trying to get back to simpler times in a lot of ways, and so that's that's kind of what this quilt represents to me, just simplicity and creating things with your hands. All right, let me show you my progress on my big old whip that I've been trying to stitch on, and I did get a lot done, but you would never know. You really probably, well, I think if you looked at last video and this video, you will see some progress. But my stitch for this time right now is Hannah Lancaster. She's kind of my focus piece. She's in my time period, 1838, and I've always wanted to stitch her, so this is the year. Here she is with the threads. I'm using a Vera Soie. I'm using Legacy Linen. I will link the name. Oh no, I have it right here. Let's see. Fuller's Teasel, 38 count. And when I was stitching with friends, I got a lot of this dress filled in and this grass over here. Now let me tell you, grass, you know, Brenda has a word for grass. I have a word for dresses. Oh my goodness. I have almost used a complete skein of that silk on her dress. Amazing. Glorious. I have to order another skein. But isn't she sweet? I just love her. I'm loving it so, so much. These colors are really unique for me, the golds and the greens. But you know, I guess I do kind of gravitate to them because the stitch, this Ann Wilson, the Quaker Sampler stitch has a lot of these same colors, and you're going to see in a minute that the next one that I want to start has a lot of these same colors. And like I said, you know, I'm going with what the designer charted. And of course, look at how many, I mean, there's just a ton of baskets in this little chart, in this little stitch. So she's getting there. I did have this pressed, but I kind of, So that's my progress on Hannah. Put her down. I also worked on my elongated hexagon quilt, and that quilt, I'll show you. Let me show it to you. Now this quilt is based on an early quilt that's in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and I've decided to do, of course, my own colorway, and I created this little sampler in the center, and I added some motifs that represent things that mean something to me and my family. And on the bottom I need to do the date, but that will come later. Anyway, what I love about this quilt, I have fully broken away from being a little bit, you know, timid about pattern to fully embracing patterned fabrics and putting all of them together. It's a little bit cumbersome to hold up because it's such an odd shape. And it is also a medallion style because you're starting in the center and then you do a ring around the center and then you frame that with another ring and you go on and on and on. So each ring you add several pieces and it gets bigger and bigger until it's the size you want, and then you're done. So I really enjoy that. That's a different kind of stitching. My eyes are tired from doing a lot of cross-stitch needlework or machine piecing. I love to sit and just do some hand piecing. It's really relaxing. All right, the new start that I'm hoping to dive into, you know, relatively soon, I don't have the linen yet, is Sarah Wilson. She was charted by the Scarlet Letter. Of course, I've talked about her many times, the things on this chart that draw me in, the ladies with the brooms, the history, the border. There's some lovely aspects to this chart. I don't have the linen picked out yet, but I did get the threads when I was at the attic, and I'm considering using Legacy Linen Russian Tea Cake because I'm really loving the combination of Legacy Linen and a Versois. That's making me super happy right now. I like the coverage. I love the way it feels in my hands. It's also a good count for me. I've had eye issues. It's a great count for me for stitching. I'm pleased with the results. I like the way the floss, the silk puffs out into the little squares. So this I wanted to share with you because I found this really interesting. Now, the top row is the DMC. This is charted for DMC and a Versois, and the bottom row is the Versois. And then you'll see there are a few that I pulled out into the middle. And these were the ones that when I had the DMC, so I pulled it. I always like to start with if there's something charted for DMC, I always start with the DMC if I'm going to convert it or use another type of floss. And as I pulled the silks, I realized there are some huge disparities, and some of them were kind of troublesome to me, and some of them were troublesome from a visual standpoint, and I don't know if the dye lots have changed or since it was charted or what, but also from historical standpoint. Some of the colors, I just said, that wasn't even really a dye that was available in that time period. Sarah Wilson is an 1837 chart. So anyway, so I just went with my gut and my own interpretation, and I picked colors that I knew were a little more time period specific and just were more pleasing to me, and went ahead and pulled the threads for that. It will change things a tiny bit, but that's okay. Like I said, we don't see the back, so we don't really know. I don't really know what the original looks like. There's just a tiny picture here. I probably could dive on the internet and find it, but like this turkey red was more readily available from what I know than this shade, so I'm going to go with that. This lemony yellow, I chose to go with the cream, kind of a more cream. Now this is a very yellowy mustard, and I could only get kind of a greeny yellow. So I've had to make some of my own adaptations and my own interpretations just based on what makes me happy. When will I start that? I don't know, but Sampler September's coming, and maybe I'll feel a little more like I've made a bigger dent in Hannah Lancaster, and I can justify starting another project. So anyway, I have some really lovely books to share with you. I always like to share books. I'm going to share this one first because I've had this book for a while. There are a couple of quilts in here that I really want to make. And I have recently been turned on to an Instagrammer named Plain Stitch Deb. Plain Stitch Deb, I will link her below. She has my dream job. She lives in Wales, and I believe she lives in Wales. She studies British and Welsh quilts, and she goes into people's homes, which is what I used to do with documentation, and gets their story. Quilters from, these are people who have generational quilts, and finds out all about the history of how that was passed down through the family. And what I find so fascinating is the motifs, and it's mostly in whole cloths. And a whole cloth is where it's just one piece of fabric, and it's the stitching that tells the story. It's just all the quilting. And a lot of them are quilted in a medallion style, like this, where there's a motif in the center, and then it goes around and around and around. And so I know I love Welsh samplers. How can you not? The colors are just woo! And the quilts are fantastic like that too, strong and vibrant. But there's also this aspect of quilts in Wales that are just a whole cloth with lots of stitching. I'll talk more about it in the future. Anyway, so this book has a lot about British quilt history and medallion or frame style quilts, because of course that style came from the UK to America when America was settled. So Padma, a lovely follower of mine, gave me a link to a woman who was doing a talk about this book, and I will link that below because it was just really fascinating. And if you don't have the book or don't want to purchase it but want to learn about that, it's really well worth listening to. So I wanted to share this book with you for all those reasons, because I've done a frame quilt, I've shared it with you, and this is another thing you can dive into. But you can see some of the early quilts, and you can see the pattern in the fabric, and that's really what I've been exploring. So beautiful, beautiful, beautiful book full of great information. Highly recommend it. Another book that you might think, it talks about Busks, Basques, and brush braid by Pam Inder, and I will link this below. This book is the history of dressmaking in England, and of course textile history all ties into how fabric was accessed for quilts and the dyes that were available for threads. And so to me it all relates, because anyway, fabulous book. I think it said in here that it took her 20 years to compile all the information. It is amazing. And it's so interesting because it talks not only about the details of the dressmaking and mantua making industry, but just the culture that went on and how what was going on in that time period for clothing and clothing making. So great book. I'm not done with it, but I'm diving in. And then this one I haven't really broken into it yet. A friend recommended it. Amish Quilts. Now, some people believe that Amish quilts may have descended or been influenced by Welsh quilts. But this is by Janneken Smucker, and it's about the culture around Amish quilts. Not only the Amish quilts themselves, but the culture, and I find that just equally as fascinating. So, next time, well, first I'll tell you that I have been so excited to share an announcement with you, and it's really close. I've had a little bump in the road that I've had to hold off again a tiny bit, but it's very close, and I cannot wait. I know you're going to love it just as much as I love sharing it with you, and it's coming soon, I promise. So keep checking back. I will, believe me, you'll maybe hear me from my house when I finally let this all out of the bag. It's very exciting, and so stick with me. It's coming soon. I'll keep you posted. Now, next time, I hope to have picked some linen for my Sarah Wilson. I hope I will have more progress on my projects. I don't think I'm going to have more haul, but you never know, because that can happen. I might have a little bit more done on some of my quilts that I will show you, and I'm considering, and you tell me what you think, and if you're interested, I'm considering kind of doing something on baskets and the play between baskets and quilts and samplers. I don't know. Let me hear from you if you think that's a great idea. I also have had quite a few people, after I showed my work basket finish for Mary Brutnell, I've had a lot of people say, you know what, because I stitched this with Gobelins and wanted to kind of approximate Mary's experience as a little girl. Could you guide me, help me? Could you kit this up for me? I would love to do that. If you're interested in me kitting this up so you can experience stitching with approximate materials, of someone in 1839 and kind of get that tactile feel for a lower count, a thicker thread, just the whole thing. Because I believe I learn so much from doing and experiencing it, and I think everyone will have a takeaway from it. So yeah, if that's something interesting to you, let me know again in the comments. And thank you again for joining me. It's just been so fun to share my experiences with you and all the things that I love. And until I see you in 2 weeks, make time for stitching. Bye, friends.